Amy, that was gorgeous. Thank you. Good morning, Wash Park.
Good morning.
I'm Reverend Nicole, and I'm really glad to be with you this morning. We're joined by friends here in the sanctuary and also many friends with us via Zoom. So if we can just take a moment to say good morning to our friends on Zoom, the camera's over there. Good morning, everyone. We're really glad we get to do this together. You'll find both welcome cards and prayer request cards on the back table. There's a red box there. You can fill them out. If you're new to us, it will get you on a weekly and monthly newsletter and not a whole lot else. Every once in a while, we send a special email, but we promise not to spam you. The prayer requests, unless you indicate, will be shared with the wider congregation so we can be in prayer with you on those. And you can drop them in that red box or in the offering plate. However you are arriving today, you're welcome here because of who you are and where you are on life's journey. This Sunday, we are continuing in an August series focused on listening as a spiritual practice, both listening to each other well and listening to the holy well. And it's all part of getting ready for what I hope will be a truly joyful exercise of listening for where God might be calling us as a community collectively to be at work and at play in the next 3 to 5 years together. I'm now going to invite Beth, who's with us via Zoom today, to lead us in our call to celebration, which is found in your bulletin.
Come, you who feel certain, and you who will always wonder.
We come ready to listen.
Come, you who feel at home at this table, and you who are still finding your place.
We come to make room for those around us.
Come, let us listen to one another and for the holy.
May our hearts be opened, our boundaries widened toward love.
And now please stand in body or spirit for our opening song, Draw the Circle Wide.
Choir is going to come up and help me lead it today.
Of course. Whatever. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. God is the Lord of the circle, round whom all creation turns. Nothing lost but held forever in God's gracious arms. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. Let our hearts touch far horizons, so encompass great and small. Let our loving know no borders, in multitudes fall. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. Let our dreams we dream be larger than we have ever dreamed before. Let the dream of Christ be in us, open every door. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide.
Our first reading is from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 15, verses 21 through 28. Please note we often adapt scripture to use inclusive language and expansive names for God, reflecting our belief that the holy cannot be contained by any single human image, gender, or name. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Rabbi, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed from that moment. Our second reading is Marin Tirabasi's reflection on the story of the Canaanite woman. Please note, for any delicate ears, we replace 2 cuss words. She is not the downward-facing dog, and he is not at his godliest, and yet a child is healed. And if you've ever let your ignorance show like toilet paper stuck to a shoe, or your first reaction flash like tooth spinach, or your prejudice fart in public, you've got this story. Being tired is a dog, the only one in this story. And every one of us has said some darn near unforgivable thing. But in the end, what matters is not even what did you learn, but was the child healed?
Living God, touch our hearts through your words and through your spirit. Kindle our imaginations, breathe new life into our actions as we dream and work to shape your new world.
Before I dive into this week's reflection, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce, for any who might be new to Mateo. Mateo, would you give everybody a wave if you have time to come forward? I know you're pressing important buttons over there that I don't understand. Mateo will be serving as our tech wizard. Would you like to say a brief hello?
I just wanted to say hello, and hello again to those of you that I've seen before, and to those of you I haven't. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to serve.
And no, that does not mean that Peter is not going to don the tech wizard hat regularly. This is just giving Peter some much needed relief and backup. And for those who were with us when Mateo was a tech wizard for us in the old building, we're just really glad to have another piece of continuity here in our new space. So one of my dearest friends to this day came out to me when we were teenagers. I had grown up in a pretty conservative Roman Catholic household, and I had been taught a fairly clear answer about homosexuality. You could say I knew the answer to that catechism class question. But I also knew my friend. He was actually the person sitting next to me in Catholic Mass when I met my now husband. He's rather famous for saying, "What about that one? He's kind of cute." 26 years of marriage later, we still have him to thank for that. He's one of the kindest, funniest people I know. And he's famous in our family for mailing me all through seminary quarterly boxes of chocolates and poetry about saints from his travels. So when this warm, loving, whip-smart, kind human being nervously told me that he was gay, and then went on to tell me what a struggle it had been to be a gay teenager in a military family in North Carolina, I suddenly had to sit with this very cut and dry Catholic teaching on one hand and this lived experience of somebody I loved in the other. And I wish I could tell you that I immediately responded with some beautifully expansive theology about how all of us are made in the image of God and the wideness of divine love. Rather, I think 17-year-old me said, "Oh, I've never met anyone that's gay." And he just looked at me for a minute and he said, "Yeah, you have. In fact, you've known me for years." I told him that church had taught me that part of our lives was a choice. And he asked me, after telling me all the things that had been hard about his teen years, "Why would I ever choose this path, Nicole?" And at that point, I loved my friend. And so I stopped talking. I stopped asking stupid questions and I started listening. And I listened to what it had been like for him to know this important part of himself from his earliest grade school crushes that we all have. And I listened to how nervous he was in carrying this thing that he had held privately into words between us. I think he was worried that he was going to lose our friendship over my religious belief. And as I listened to him, something began to shift. His personhood, everything I knew about him, simply did not fit inside that tight theological box that I had been given. And eventually I had to decide, what did I trust more? This tidy certainty that I'd been taught, or this beloved, complex human that was right in front of me? And I suppose there's a bit of a spoiler in how that turned out in the fact that I am up here today. And I will tell you that he absolutely delights that he set me down the path towards the UCC. Our early conversations sent me back to the scriptures, because for me, those remain sacred texts, not the only sacred texts, but sacred to me, on which those Catholic teachings had been based. And with the help of scholarship, I went back to the Hebrew and Greek words. I learned and delighted in the fact that the word homosexual did not appear in an English translation of the Bible until 1946. That was when the Revised Standard Version used it to translate two Greek terms whose meaning remained debated. And that is not a sermon about those translations. I could give that another time. But I began to see how much interpretation had been layered on top of these ancient texts that had been translated many different ways, and how much certainty I had inherited without examining the foundation of that for myself. And I think one thing that I deeply appreciate about that conversation as a teenager is that my friend didn't try to argue me out of my theology. He asked me questions. He listened to my answers. He asked me to listen to him. And that act of sacred listening changed my belief. The revelation of his very being, of his lived experience, sent me back to those sacred texts, and together they invited me into a wider field of belief. And I could not have named it that way then. I was 17, but he helped me to see that God's table was larger than the one that I had been taught to imagine. And so I've been thinking a lot about that friendship this week because of the reading that we had today in Matthew's Gospel. This passage is always a fun one to preach on. It gives us a rather grumpy Jesus, and yet somehow leaves me with one of the most hopeful encounters in the Gospels, because it shows us what listening across difference can do. So to dive into that passage a little bit, Jesus has left familiar Jewish communities around Galilee, and he's headed northwest to these towns, Tyre and Sidon. They were coastal cities, wealthy cities, predominantly Gentile territory. So Jesus was crossing, we hear in this first verse, not just a geographic boundary from a familiar place to a new place, but to a place with religious, ethnic, and cultural difference. And almost as soon as he gets there, someone from the other side of that boundary comes looking for him, sort of comes in hot, yelling at him, if we really look at the text. And Matthew makes sure that we know exactly what kind of woman this is. A Canaanite woman, he says. And that's a very old, loaded name. Mark's version of this same story names her a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician by birth. But Matthew instead chooses this biblically loaded word, Canaanite, a name that carried memories of Israel's ancient enemies. So Matthew, in naming this woman, the Canaanite woman, is sort of turning up the volume on the differences between them. So we have a Gentile woman publicly confronting a Jewish teacher who is male. So she's crossing enormous religious and social boundaries just to have this conversation. And it doesn't really start as a conversation. She comes in yelling, "Have mercy on me." She shouts, "My daughter is suffering." And Jesus does something surprising, to me at least. Nothing. He does nothing. His disciples are a little less restrained. They want her sent away. And I have to admit that every time I read this passage, I really want Jesus to step in right here. My copy editing instincts are very strong because this is usually the moment in the Gospels when the dang disciples get it wrong again. And Jesus intervenes and shows us a better way. Just one chapter earlier, we have the story of the crowd, the hungry crowd that has followed Jesus to a quiet place. And they are about to be sent away hungry by the disciples. But Jesus widens that circle with leftovers that miraculously multiply. And that's the Jesus I recognize. Jesus who is tired, grieving the loss of his cousin, and still he finds a way to feed everybody before they are sent home. But this time, Jesus doesn't do that. Instead, when he does reply, he says to her, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Now, this whole lost sheep metaphor is not a new one in Matthew's gospel. A few chapters earlier, Jesus sends his disciples out with nearly the same instructions, same wording. He says, "Begin with the lost sheep of Israel, not the surrounding Gentile communities." So what I gather from that is that Jesus appears to understand his ministry as ordered, that his ministry first is to be a part of God's work of healing and restoring the people of Israel. And this woman is asking Jesus to step out of order, to step beyond those boundaries now, to step beyond the mission as he understood it in time. And she refuses to leave. Now, when we were reflecting on this passage in our Wednesday morning contemplative service, I hope Melinda doesn't mind me naming her. Melinda pointed out something really beautiful about what happens here. I was very caught up in Jesus's rudeness, but she pointed out that the woman stops yelling at this point in the story. So she's come in yelling for help, and she's not getting anywhere. And she changes her posture. She comes closer to him, and she kneels at his feet, and she simply says, "Rabbi, help me." 3 words. And Jesus responds, again, not in the way that I would hope Jesus would respond. "It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." Just like that, Jesus becomes not just grumpy, but rude. Many Christians have spent centuries trying to make this line less awful. You will hear a lot of people stand up here and say, maybe Jesus was testing her faith, or maybe he was illustrating, he was method acting in order to expose the disciples' prejudice. Or maybe there was a twinkle in his eye that Matthew forgot to mention, or the scribes somehow left out. Maybe. But the text doesn't give us any of that. What the text gives us is a desperate mother asking Jesus to heal her child, a Jesus who ignores her and denies her and then compares her to a dog. So when I was thinking about what would be a good text to hold in conversation with this, I went to one of my favorite UCC pastor poets, Maren Tirabassi, because she has a real gift for taking difficult texts and taking them very seriously without sanding off their rough edges. And in her reflection on this passage, she writes, "She is not the downward-facing dog, and he is not at his godliest, and yet a child is healed." I appreciate her willingness to let Jesus have a very human bad day. One of the gifts of believing that God really came to earth and took on the human experience in Christ is that we don't have to imagine Jesus as untouched by culture, untouched by bodily fatigue, untouched by hormones and irritation, because we believe, at least I believe, that Jesus was fully human as well as fully divine. And human beings grow, not just physically, but in wisdom and emotion. Luke's gospel even tells us in that narrative of Jesus becoming a young adult that Jesus increased in wisdom. So I wonder whether this woman is one of the people through whom Jesus's human wisdom and compassion was enlarged. Even more remarkable than Jesus's rude remark, the Canaanite woman does something pretty remarkable with that insult. I like to think how I would reply if one of you called me a dog. She climbs right inside this rude metaphor, saying, "Yes, but even a dog gets to eat the crumbs that fall from your table." In other words, she's saying, "All right, fine, I see you're having a bad day. Let's talk about dogs, Jesus. If you're going to call me a dog, let's talk about it. Have you ever watched a dog around a dinner table? Would you ever have to toss food to a dog by a dinner table? Not the dogs we've owned. Our dogs are very much not outside of our household. They're right there, underfoot, waiting, watching whoever is likely to drop or be talked out of a piece of dinner. Spoiler alert, it's my dad. All of my dogs know this. Inevitably, food gets dropped, right? I wondered out loud last month why the carpet under our kitchen table was suddenly so crumb-covered, only to realize that our dog had obviously been serving very thoroughly on cleanup duty and is no more. So I want to take a look at the creatures that are mentioned in this text, because they really stand out in ways that are uncomfortable. I spent some time this week just trying to study the sheep, the dogs, the land, the bread. There's a biblical scholar named Elaine Wainwright. If you want to go down any of these rabbit holes, she has some really wonderful wide audience articles that you can Google. But she does what's called an ecological read of this passage. She looks at the system, beginning with the place itself. And that was really interesting to me. I won't bore you too much with it, but the two cities that are named in this passage depend on the surrounding regions, including Galilee, where Jesus has come from, for food. They were wealthy cities that consumed food from the outside agricultural regions. So even this argument about who metaphorical bread belongs to is already tangled up in a long history of land and resources and power. Matthew's choice to call her a Canaanite brings even more of that into the text. Wainwright suggests that the name Canaanite is placed there to evoke that ancient story of a people who were denied access to land and resources. It was the people of Canaan, which the book of Joshua portrays Israel as conquering and dispossessing of their land to become the promised land. I can give a whole sermon series on why that is not historically accurate. But this Canaanite woman is again being told, in effect, that none of this bread is meant for her. Even the geography is talking back. And Wainwright asks me to notice everything that gets crowded into this encounter. There's a lot of metaphors in a pretty short text. We have the suffering body of a daughter, lost sheep, dogs, bread, hunger, land, and social economic boundaries that are being crossed. So when we read the passage from the whole system, the woman's response becomes even more interesting. Jesus has already described being sent to the lost sheep of Israel. But in the next sentence, he changes metaphors. He shifts from the shepherd's leadership or the shepherd's field to a household that has children who belong at the table, and clearly dogs that he thinks belong somewhere in tossing distance from it. And the bread is meant for one, but not for the other. The woman looks more closely at what Jesus himself has imagined and sees that dogs don't stay at tossing distance from the table. The dogs are already under the table, she says. Crumbs are already falling. Sheep and children and dogs and bread and bodies and hunger are already connected in all these different ways across these people that seem so different. And Jesus is trying to present this tidy household hierarchy, and she gives him an ecosystem. And suddenly those boundaries don't feel quite so solid. In my experience, creation does this to our human boundaries all the time. Watersheds are notoriously unimpressed with our county lines. Tree roots don't stop because somebody has a property surveyed. Migrating birds cross our national boundaries without passports. The very wind on this campus has a different idea about us flying our church flag than we do. I have fought that battle and lost 3 times. Amy and I will tell you. The living world keeps reminding us that our tidy human categories are rarely as tidy as we first imagine. And this woman is pressing Jesus towards a larger vision of the very love that he embodies. She demands that her daughter is not outside of belonging to God. And she demands that her daughter is not outside of God's ability to show compassion. I don't have a clear answer for why Jesus spoke the way he did in this passage. My best guess is maybe Jesus was a little hangry. One chapter earlier, he's trying to get away from the crowds who follow him. He takes the leftovers that he has and he multiplies them to feed thousands. He's a little protective of the leftovers in this passage. So maybe while the woman was talking back to him, maybe the woman was yelling at him, Jesus finally got to eat a piece of bread for himself. And whatever shifted, his response shifted, and the daughter is healed. So what do we do with this strange story of a grumpy Jesus? What can we take from it in terms of sacred listening practices? I think the question that came to mind for me is, what if part of sacred listening means coming to the conversation, accepting that we might not have seen the whole field of vision? We might not have the whole picture. What if listening well means leaving enough room for another person and their lived experience to widen what we understand? That's what this woman does. She asks Jesus to look again, even in the face of bias. Some of the people who have changed the way I understand God and faith and justice and love have done the same thing for me. They have come to my initial bias and they have asked me to listen to their lived experience, and they've widened my field of compassion. And I think sacred listening demands that kind of humility, which is a very difficult thing to hold all the time. This willingness to remember that none of us can see the whole field. And I wonder who might already be inviting us in this community to look a little wider. We look pretty wide here, but as I was reflecting on that this week, the people that came to mind were the new mother who saw our sign when it was cooperating with the wind, walking her baby across campus, and came to church, came to coffee hour. The retiree who overheard a rather rowdy conversation about tornadoes on our Wednesday coffee crew at Dirt and introduced himself and came and put on a program for us. the friend who heard finally enough good, wacky stories about this community to carefully try church again. The refugees who met two of our people working in the pop-up pantry out in the parking lot last week to receive some things to supplement the SNAP benefits that have been taken away. Maybe it's the high schoolers that return in just a couple of days. I often see a few of them sitting by themselves on the quad or getting coffee by themselves at dirt, and it is everything in my mother pastor heart that I can do not to interrupt them and be a friend. I know they don't always want that. And what about the community college students? For those of you who have not heard the good news, Emily Griffith Community College has purchased the building next door, and they are making this campus their flagship campus. That won't happen until I think the 2027 academic year, but we are going to have all of these community college students sharing our campus with us. So I think part of that sacred listening exercise as we go into our visioning process this fall is asking who is already near our table, who's in tossing distance that might need an invitation in, who is carrying a story or a need or a gift or a glimpse of the holy that can enlarge our life together. Whether they stay as members of this community or just enrich us in serving alongside us or interacting with our community, I know our field of vision becomes wider. That sacred listening helps us to lift our eyes beyond the people that we already know and love and notice the wider field of belonging that is calling to us all around us. So, in the spirit of you all having just listened to me speak for 15 minutes, I want to invite us into a little bit of a sacred listening exercise with one another. Amy's going to play just some quiet instrumental music while we do that. I am going to ask you, if you're able, get up and wander a little bit. Find one or two people that you don't usually sit next to at our metaphorical table. And we'll have the question on the slide here. If you're with us via Zoom, you can take a look at that question and just respond in the chat if you feel so moved. But the question is, what person or experience has widened your faith? And we'll call us back together in about 5-6 minutes. So if you gather in groups of 2 or 3, have about 2 minutes each and guard each other's time. What person or experience has widened your faith?
So we now come to the time for our offering. The ministry and daily life of this congregation are sustained in meaningful ways through the generosity of this community. If Wash Park UCC is a place that supports your spiritual life, we invite you to help sustain its ministry in return. If you are a guest today, please receive this service as our gift to you. If this is your spiritual home, you're invited to come forward during the music to place your offering on the offering plate. We also recognize that many people give online, and details for how to do so are available on the screen and in the bulletin. join me in the prayer of dedication for our offering. Incarnate One, there is no knowledge of you apart from each other. You wait for us in the face of our neighbors and the body of the earth. In all your many forms, you come to us with offerings and asks. May our gift be a sign of our gratitude. And now, please stand in body or spirit for our closing song, Imagine by John Lennon.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. There's no countries. You guys killed it. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. The brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
Y'all are going to make me cry. Please receive these words of sending and blessing. May the Holy Dreamer meet you at the most crowded tables. May you have eyes to see who is waiting on the crumbs. May you listen well enough to be changed, and may what you learn widen the field of love. Amen. Let's share a sign of God's peace with our friends on Zoom and then with one another. Peace be with each of you. Peace be with you. Let's pass the peace.